السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بها نعمة، ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على النبي المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, tonight we will discuss a very important event that took place in the early 90s, specifically in 1993. That's called the Oslo Agreement. And why it's important? Because it was a turning point in the struggle for the liberation of Palestine and against the Zionists' endeavor to take over Palestine. They claimed in the old days that we are establishing their state on a land that has no people, and it was given to people that have no land. Although a substantial number of Muslims and Christians and few Jews were living in Palestine all along and at the time. So what is the Oslo process? What is this agreement that came as a result of this secretive Oslo negotiation? To start with, Palestine, from the time that Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab received the keys to the city, remains in the hands of the Muslims with open space for Muslims and non-Muslims. In fact, a big number, more than half of the first generation under the rule of Islam in Palestine, they were not Muslims. Mostly their children eventually accepted Islam, and some of them did accept Islam too. From that point, Palestine remained Islamic, and Muslims took utmost care of the sites for the non-Muslims. Basically, the two holiest places for Christians, the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Kanisat al-Qiyamah in Al-Quds, were taken care of and by the Muslims. Until the Crusaders came, they took over Jerusalem for a while and part of Palestine, until Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi radiyallahu anhu came and liberated Palestine after the Battle of Hittin. From that point, Palestine remained under the Muslims until 1914, when World War I started, and basically the British took over Palestine. And at the time, the Uthmani Khilafah disintegrated, Khilafah was abolished, and there was a mandate for the British to rule over Palestine. 1917, the British gave the Balfour Declaration, which says that the British look with consideration to establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And by the time that the British were preparing to leave toward the end of the 1940s, they gave the Jews the opportunity by inviting so many of them to come from Europe because of the events of World War II, they said that Europe has a Jewish problem. To solve it, they sent all those Jews armed to Palestine. And if a Muslim or a Christian in Palestine would have a pistol or a gun, he will be executed. So they facilitated. And when the UN took its decision to divide Palestine between its inhabitants and the Jewish newcomers, the US, Britain, and the Soviets were supportive. France eventually helped them with a nuclear program. So basically, in the early 60s, the Arab got together and they formed the so-called Palestinian Liberation Organization, with somebody by the name of Ahmad al-Shuqayri to head it. Toward the end of 60s, Yasser Arafat came to the scene, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization was born, and the title was that, or the aim was to liberate Palestine. And they had arms in Jordan. In 1970, there was a civil war in Jordan. As a result, the Jordanian army, with the agreement of the kingdom and Egypt, got the Palestinian resistance to move out of Jordan to Lebanon. The Palestinians got to Lebanon, and Lebanon historically, from the 1860s, was ruled a little with separate arrangements, because there was a war between the Druze and the Christian Maronites in the 1860s, that is. As a result, the British Navy came to support the Druze, and the French Navy came to support the Maronites, and they imposed on Lebanon a new system. From that point, the Christian dominated Lebanon. So when the Palestinians moved resistance from Jordan to Lebanon, the Christians were alarmed because they are Muslims, and they thought that although the Palestinian Liberation Organization is a secular organization, and Arafat made it clear that our future country will not have a religion. In an interview with the Time magazine in the early 70s, لن يكون لدولتنا دين. Our future country will not have a religion. Despite all of this, when they moved to Lebanon, enmity started, and many Muslims of Lebanon start training on weapons and the left. At the time, there were people on the left, so-called the progressive, and allied themselves with the PLO, allied themselves with the Sunni Muslims, and initially the Shiite Muslims did not have much weight until Amal was born. Amal also, the PLO played a major role in training the Amal forces, the Shiite. And after that, the Hezbollah was born. Eventually, the Israelis decided to invade Lebanon in the early 80s and got the PLO out of Lebanon to Tunisia and Sudan and other countries. At that time, when the Palestinian resistance left Lebanon, there was a huge massacre, and it's called the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, where when the Israelis invaded Lebanon, they surrounded Palestinian camps and allowed the Maronites to go and kill and hack people left and right. This is not the subject tonight, but it's a very disastrous event in the history of the Palestinian camps in Lebanon. And as a result of it, Sharon resigned from his position, and people were not prosecuted for those crimes. But hundreds of men, women, younger children were hacked to death in a night raid where Sharon gave them the full authority to kill and do whatever they want. This is just after the Palestinian resistance left. The US brought back its forces, and then there was a big explosion that killed more than 200 American soldiers, which led to the US to withdraw from Lebanon. At that point, the Palestinian Liberation Organization recognized that they are far from the homeland. And in Palestine, there was a rise of some Islamic movement. Initially, it was not really with that big support among the Palestinians, but slowly start building up to the point that the Arafat and his people realized that they may lose ground in there. On the other hand, the Israelis decide that the PLO is out of the picture. From now on, we need to establish authority for the Palestinians, locals, meaning we will have election for the local people to take care of, not security, take care of education, health, and order, and so on and so forth. But the Palestinians inside mostly refuse this. So the PLO recognized that they need to do something, so they start fooling the Palestinian people. How? In 1988, the PLO parliament in exile, المجلس الوطني, met in Algeria. Met where? In Algeria. In Algiers, and they declare that we are establishing a Palestinian state. Of course, this was absolutely of no value. What do you mean you're establishing a Palestinian state? You are based in Tunisia, and you do not have really much of a presence around Palestine from this regard. The camps are under not your rule, and inside Palestine, people are going in different direction. So what is it that you are establishing? Well, they want to have a big party, and they made the announcement, but the actual reason for that meeting was the lines at the end, that the Palestinian Liberation Organization recognizes UN Resolution 242 and 338. Notice this. This is how the Saudis these days are approaching, meaning the government, not the people, are approaching normalization with the Zionists. They are telling one story and they are doing something different. You find, for example, the Saudi media saying, oh, the Saudis have cut the, meetings and the dialogue with the Israelis because the Israelis are not giving anything to the Palestinians. And Mohammed bin Salman comes on public TV for everyone to see on Fox and said, no, we have meeting every day. We have been meeting every day, and every day we are improving. It's exactly the same procedure that was followed. They are following the same book that the PLO have done. So they basically announced a Palestinian state to be established when this was totally out of order. There's no such a thing. But again, the whole meeting was for the last lines at the end. When you buy stuff or when you sign an agreement, you will find, things written up there, and there's a fine print that people cannot read. Well, the fine print has the most important things that you need to be aware of. And the PLO has fooled the Palestinian people at the time, unfortunately, where some people bought into, we're going to have a Palestinian state. Although the whole meeting was to satisfy the Americans to open dialogue with the PLO. So actually what was important is the Palestinian parliament and the PLO says that we accept resolution 242 and UN resolution 338, basically saying we accept that Israel has, Zionists have a right in Palestine. But of course, the Israelis did not care about what they said or what they decreed, because their thinking is, we have the whole loaf. Why should we decide? We will eat it. Why should we divide it with others? That was the thinking of the Zionists at the time, that there's no resistance. We have people inside that we need to deal with, but basically this issue of a Palestinian state is out of the question. They tried a few things that we will not get into tonight, the Israelis, to try to get the people in Palestine. Tricks, for example, they tried to get the so-called al-makhatir. Each village have somebody called Mukhtar. You know, he's not like, a mayor, but he have a status to try to have those makhatir, to have some kind of a coalition, and they will have duties. But some of those who tried to participate, some of them were killed by people from different Palestinian faction. In fact, the Popular Front for Palestine have killed a group of people. There was a cell in a city called Silwad that they assassinated a few of those people who were agents and working with the Israelis. So basically, people stopped from coming into this process, and the Israelis did not go anywhere with it. At one point, they offer to have Jordan to have some influence over the West Bank, the government of Jordan. But again, the locals did not accept it. Remember that the Israelis took Gaza from Egypt, and they took the West Bank from Jordan. So that there was something along those lines. Plus, the Zionists have a very friendly, I would say brotherly, ruler in Jordan. King Hussein was close to them more than, in fact, the Muslims. He made a public statement after Jordan's agreement. He said, I met with every Israeli prime minister except Menachem Begin. And those meetings are many, many times. And the Israeli intelligence have released a book about 2 weeks ago on the anniversary of Yom Kippur War, basically what we call the War of October 1973, saying that King Hussein went and met with the leadership in Israel and told them that Egypt and Syria will attack Israel. Be prepared. This is something that is written in the minutes of those meetings. So from this perspective, the Israelis thought Jordan can take over the West Bank. But people have refused, and BLO, of course, refused. But BLO was more diplomatic. They said, we establish a Palestinian state, and then we'll discuss what's after that. So the Israelis found themselves with about 4 million Palestinians under their rule. What to do with them? That was the dilemma that the Israelis have. They cannot give them Israeli citizenship. Because if you give them Israeli citizenship, even if they agree to it, it means you have 4 million voters. Now, the Israelis have 2 million Arab voters. Bulk of them are Muslims, and some of them are Christians, and some of them are Druze. So imagine their thinking is we cannot give the Palestinians, and the Palestinians will not accept it in general, except those in 1948, which now they number about 2 million people. So the dilemma of the Israelis, the Zionists, how to deal with 4 million Palestinians who live under the Israeli military rule. The PLO on the other side is how to talk to the Americans, how to be accepted by the Americans. And Arafat, from the old days, from the 60s, have put somebody who's very close to the Yahud, the Zionists, and close to the Americans and the Europeans. He was trusted by those people. His name is Mahmoud Abbas. Arafat knew from day one who is Mahmoud Abbas. And they knew that Mahmoud Abbas is totally accepted by the Americans, Europeans, and the Israelis. And days have shown that Mahmoud Abbas is more loyal to the Zionists than even his surroundings. And we will come to it. So this momentum led to something called Oslo Accord. So on one side, the Israelis have 4 million Palestinians under them, what to do with them. On the other side, the PLO find itself impotent. They cannot do anything because basically they're far away from Palestine, although the Arab and the Muslim countries have recognized them as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, but that did not go anywhere. All of it is on paper. There's no actual value to this. Now, add to this two factors: that Sadat of Egypt decided to visit the Zionists in Palestine and eventually to sign the Camp David Accord during the time of Jimmy Carter. With that, Egypt was taken out of the equation, meaning the so-called Middle East problem, because the Palestinian problem eventually, instead of being a Muslim issue or an Arab issue, it was reduced to a Palestinian issue. You Palestinians deal with the Jews in Palestine, in occupied Palestine. At one point, this was an Islamic issue. And you find in Muslim countries all around the world, people aligning themselves and trying to support, and some of them even came to Lebanon to join the resistance and so on and so forth. Then the Arabs took over and saying that this is an Arab issue, and they made so many of those, declarations. Among the famous among them is the Saudi initiative that was given during the time of King Fahd, which basically called for the Israeli to establish a Palestinian state, and the Arabs will normalize the relationship with the Zionists. And the Arab countries, all of them, adopted that resolution. Some pretend to have reservation, but really, that was fake, from Gaddafi to, his alike. Actually, they were in line with all of this. The other factor that took place, other than Egypt getting out of the equation, is the first intifada. What is an intifada? Intifada is an uprising. And in Palestine, an uprising was taking place for many years in the 80s. And the Israelis barely can control the West Bank and Gaza. In fact, it was quoted by Rabin and by others. They were basically in the media being called the leaders who are cracking and breaking the fingers of the children. Because basically this uprising went from people who were, in their 40s and 50s and 60s, all the way to the kids who are 6 and 7 and 8. So the whole West Bank and Gaza was in that condition. So the Israelis have to come out with a way out. But they did not care much about what was said in 1988 in Algeria by establishing the so-called Palestinian state and recognizing, and the PLO recognizing the UN resolution. The Arabs countries have refused UN resolutions all along. So for Sadat to accept it and make a peace deal, so-called peace deal, which was a submission deal, a humiliating defeat for Egypt as the leader of the Arab world, for the Israelis, they would need to deal with this situation in a way or another. A major event took place at the end of the 80s and beginning of 1990s, which is the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union disintegrated and there was no longer a second power, the US took the initiative and decided that they want to push peace, so-called, between the Arabs and the Jews. That was the objective. And to deal with the issue of Palestine, but indirectly. So James Baker, who was the Secretary of State at the time, came up with this idea that the US and Russia, because now it's the Russian Federation that have inherited the Soviet legacy, they will call for a conference, international conference in Spain. And that international conference, they will be meeting face to face, supposedly, between the Zionist and Jordan, the Zionist and Syria, Lebanon, and the Palestinians. The Israelis said, no, no, we will not meet with the Palestinians. So the US came with a trick. We will have the Palestinians part of the Jordanian delegation. So basically, the Palestinian Jordanian delegation would be one delegation. So the Israelis did not recognize any entity that's called Palestine or Palestinians. And the US agreement was basically after they meet, they come as a delegation, they will meet with them separately. And after pressure from the US, the Zionists caved in. But again, they insisted that the Palestinians do not come as a separate entity. They come with a Jordanian delegation under the official Jordanian negotiating team. So this negotiation continued. It was headed by Haidar Abd al-Shafi, who's a Palestinian independent, Hanan Ashrawi, who was made by James Baker. She's an articulate Palestinian Christian lady that teaches at Birzeit University. And she was part of that delegation because basically they did not want to include anybody who's officially aligned with Arafat and company. So they brought some of those who are independent. I mean, the two main figures were Haidar Abd al-Shafi from Gaza and Hanan Ashrawi from the West Bank. Now, those negotiations with the Palestinians were not going anywhere. The negotiation with the Jordanians really were not negotiation because Jordanians already have an implicit agreement with the Zionists long time ago. As I said, the King Hussein himself stood and said, after he made the agreement, I met with every Israeli prime minister except Menachem Begin. Now, although I do not believe him, by the way, I think he still met with Menachem Begin in this regard. But he want to show that he has some patriotism because Menachem Begin is a bad guy. As if Rabin, who was, breaking the fingers of the children of Palestine, is really a good guy, and Peres, who have, done lots of harm to the Muslims' cause and the Christian cause in Palestine, as if he's a good guy. Shamir also is one of the worst leaders. I mean, this guy Shamir at one point was wanted by the British for his crimes in Palestine. There was, his picture was on a wanted list by the British. They were all criminals in the Haganah gang, Menachem Begin and Shamir and company. But that really, in this regard, was not an issue with Jordan, because Jordan, as I said, the agreement was already written. If not in ink, it was clear in their minds. So there was no issue between the Hashemite family in Jordan and the Zionists in Palestine. Although, on paper, if you at the time, a Palestinian, will go through airport, Tel Aviv airport, that's a crime in Jordan. And you will not be allowed to travel through Jordan. If you enter Palestinian territory, of course, you do not have a choice. You have to go through the Israelis' checkpoint, being Tel Aviv or the Jordanian, the Jordan River entrance. If your passport is stamped Israel, you cannot go to Hajj. You cannot go to Hajj. Imagine. Now, with Mohammed ibn Salman, the Israeli minister is making Hajj, quote unquote, to Riyadh now, while we are talking. So, if a Palestinian had this stamp, Israel, or if a Muslim from Britain, just like these days, they go for, to visit the Masjid al-Aqsa for Shadd al-Rihal, if your passport is stamped Israel, you cannot go to Hajj. In fact, today, while we are talking, today, if a Lebanese or a Syrian citizen go to Palestine for any reason, they will be arrested and put in jail in Lebanon and Syria. One of my close friends, who's a Palestinian Christian, His mother is 85 years old plus. They are from Palestine, but they have been in Lebanon since the Nakba of Palestine in the 40s. So she went to Palestine to visit. She came back to Lebanon and was arrested at the border. She's like 85 years old. Why? Oh, she went to the enemy. This is exactly what the Saudis used to say. This is what the Egyptians used to say. This is what the Jordanians used to say. And this is what Saddam used to say, and so on and so forth. So you can see what had happened to the Middle East after this occurred. While the Palestinians were talking to the Israelis, going under the American umbrella, and Abd al-Shafi and Hanan Ashrawi were telling the Palestinian leadership, this negotiation is not going anywhere. The Israelis just buying time. And Arafat kept telling them, go. They said, look, we are wasting your time and our time. We are consulting with you. And the Israelis knew that Arafat is giving consultation to those people what to say and this and that. And things dragged for months. And they kept telling Arafat, we are not going anywhere. And he kept telling them, go back to the negotiation. What people did not know, what the world did not know, is that there was a secret channel, a parallel secret channel that was opened in Oslo. So the people in Denmark who have some relationship with the Zionists and with some elements within the PLO accepted to be the vehicle for a secret channel between the Zionist government, we are talking about now the government, and representative from the PLO. Remember, just the year before, the Israelis refused to meet in Spain with a delegation, a Palestinian delegation. They insist that the Palestinian delegation will come under the Jordanian delegation, as we mentioned, so that we are not recognizing something called Palestine. But they realize, the Israelis, that this situation is not going anywhere. We have to have a solution for those Palestinians who live under the military rule in West Bank and Gaza. So they open a channel, because again, with the Intifada, the Israelis lost control. It was, fear. Army could not enter into the West Bank because basically people were, this uprising have touched every corner of the Palestinian society. And the image of the Zionists in the wood was being tarnished because they were basically arresting 6- and 7-year-old and 8-year-old and breaking their fingers. And there were videos. There were videos of Israeli soldiers climbing hills in Palestine where the kids were up there throwing stones and they break their bones. I mean, the videos were there. So basically, the Israelis found themselves with this dilemma. They decided to open a secret channel with the PLO. This secret channel resulted in 1993 with something that's called Oslo I Accord. Oslo I Accord, which is, quote, Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government Arrangements, which declared the aim of the negotiation and set forth the framework for the interim period, the solution of the Israeli civil administration upon the inauguration of the Palestinian Legislative Council. This is Article 7 of the Oslo Accord. So basically, what it is in secret, the Zionists agreed to meet with the PLO. The PLO agreed to recognize the right of the Zionists in Palestine. And the only thing that the PLO got is one thing, that the Israelis, the Zionists, recognize that the PLO is the representative of the Palestinian people. This is important. You need to remember this, because what will come is a consequence, a disaster that the Palestinians themselves, either knowingly or unknowingly, have betrayed Palestine and the people of Palestine. So basically, for the PLO to come, we recognize that the Zionists have a right in Palestine. All what they got is a statement from the Israelis that we recognize the PLO as the representative of Palestinian people. And all the subjects will be negotiated. All the subjects will be negotiated, especially the critical subjects that have to do with the borders, that have to do with security, that have to do with the right of return, because there are 14 million Palestinians now in the world. How many Palestinians are inside historic Palestine? There are about 4 million, 2 million in Gaza, 2 million in the West Bank, and there are about 2 million in the 1948 who are Israeli citizens. So altogether, there are 6 million plus Palestinians in historic Palestine, and there are 8 million outside, mainly in camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, some of them in Egypt and Iraq, but not many. So that's the reality in this regard. There was no promises. There was no promises of a Palestinian state. There was no promises except say everything will be negotiated. What's the problem with this statement, everything will be negotiated? You have no leverage. No leverage. You as a Palestinian Authority, PLO, which later became the Palestinian Authority, you have no leverage. I mean, we still negotiate. And the Israelis will think all of Palestine is for us. We will find a formula where you will have some kind of an existence. Of course, all along Arafat is promising the people what? A Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. And that was absolute positive nonsense, because the Zionists will never agree to this. I mean, you have to understand that all of Palestine, if you want to, in the middle, drive from the east to the west, meaning from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, it will take you about 45, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, depends where you are. What country, like the Zionists, will accept that their security will be compromised and given half of that to the Palestinians? Of course, it does not make sense. Just look at the map of Palestine in terms of east to west. It's very thin in the middle, where the West Bank is. So for the Israelis to give it, the width of the state of Israel, the Zionists, will be about maybe 30 or 40 miles, no more, no less. So, I mean, it was clear what the games that the Israelis are playing, because when it comes to negotiation, they have no leverage. To add insult to injury, when they starting the negotiation, I'm going to give you one example. The water, the rights of water. So there was, imagine, you know, this is very important issue, the water. So the Israeli side came to the negotiation. They had the maps where all the water in Palestine, they know where it is. We are talking about underground water. Where is this water? In all of Palestine, they have the maps, they have the information, they have the data, they have the depth, they have all of this. The Palestinian came with ties and suits. They ties and suits. I don't think even they have books to take notes. I mean, this is them. I'm not saying this. And read the memorandum that, or I should say, what was written by those people after that we went to those meetings, the Israelis were well prepared with all the maps, and we have zero information. So without recognizing the severity of the situation, I'm just talking about water. The Palestinians signed an agreement under which the Israelis have total control of water underground in all of Palestine. When they wake up, too late. So basically, I'll give you, another angle to this water business. I was in Palestine, as you know, 2 weeks ago I came. So we live in a major city where half of the Palestinian ministries are in this city. 10 days, people were without water. 10 days. And people are asking why? I mean, usually in the week, you are 4 days without water, 3 days with water. That's why if you visit Palestine or you see any picture, you will see these huge tanks on the top of the buildings. Even if you are a dentist, you have a huge tank on the top because you need to have water to clean the teeth. And if there's no water, you cannot function. You need to close. So a household that have 10 members, and mashallah, the Palestinian families are large in this regard, especially, I mean, of course, Gaza is separate, but in Gaza, typical to somebody have 13 and 14 children. Now, things may be different. But if you're a family that are, of 10, 15 people, then you have 4 or 5 tanks, huge, on the top of the building. So basically, all of this is because of Oslo, that when the Palestinians negotiated, they have nothing to pressure the Israelis on. Absolutely, possibly nothing. So they agreed to this deal, that the Israelis have total control of water in all of Palestine, even under the so-called, eventually what's called Palestinian Authority. So now, I know of cases where some Palestinians go and dig on the ground, dig deep, and suddenly water starts coming. Some of you have been to our cemetery, right? There's a well in our cemetery. You just dig, just go deep, suddenly the water will start flushing out of the land. We have a well. The well that we have in the cemetery in here in Wendell, it's not a well that collects water. There are wells that collect water. The rain that comes, there are wells that are small wells. We are talking about underground water. So this Palestinian, and a few of them have tried it, they basically dig this well, and the moment the Israeli authority knows of it, they come and pour concrete, so that there's no chance that they will have any chance to get any water. So imagine a town that have tens of thousands, for 10 days, they have no water. So you're going to ask me, how do they get the water? Well, 2 ways. One is that you have those tanks. Sometimes they serve you for 5 days, 3 days, 4 days. But when it goes beyond that, you start buying water. So how do they buy water? There are those merchants, because the water is off here 10 days. They go to some place where there is water, and they just fill the tanks and come and sell it for 20, 30 times the regular price. Why is this? It's because of Oslo. Because basically the Palestinian Authority that became authority, the PLO, gave up on this. They gave up on security. They agreed initially, the Israelis, we'll give you Jericho and Gaza. Jericho and Gaza. And after that, they will draw from other major cities. But the Israelis will have total authority over security in all of Palestine. So, I mean, this may sound, you might think I am exaggerating, listen to this. The areas that are under the Palestinian Authority, according to the agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, if the Israeli army send a jeep or a group of soldiers to an area, the Palestinians who are working with the Palestinian Authority, who have guns, they need to put their gun down and they need to turn their face to the wall. That was the instruction. That was the instruction. That, yes, we let you come to Gaza and Jericho. We let you bring guns. But those guns, this is not a written agreement, but it's written implicitly. Those guns are not to be directed toward the Israelis. They are directed toward the mushaghibin, those who are causing problems, meaning the people who want to resist occupation. So many times we had seen that the Palestinian Authority weapons were directed, killed to injure Palestinians. That's a fact. In about two or three cases that happened, when some of the Palestinian so-called, armed Palestinian Authority people armed, they saw the Israelis coming and killing Palestinian children in the streets. Some of them could not take it, and they start shooting at the Israelis. And Abbas and his clowns will apologize for that and said, we will check and see those, who are those people? What is their loyalty? Do they have any connection? Meaning, do they have any connection to Hamas or the Islamic Jihad or the Palestinian, the popular, the liberation, الجبهة الشعبية لتحرير فلسطين, the popular front for the liberation of Palestine. So yeah, 3 incidents happened. But in general, you see all these invasions that happened to Jenin, to Nablus, to Mukhayyam Aqb al-Jabr, Mukhayyam al-Am'ari, and others, the Palestinian Authority, according to the Oslo Agreement and what came afterward, they have to put down their weapons, turn their back, and let the Israelis do whatever they want. And this has been happening day and night. And the Palestinians now know this. It's too late, but now they were fooled in this regard. Another part of the agreement is the Palestinian Authority will work to arrest people who are wanted by the Israelis. And if some people who are doing any action against the Israelis, the names will be given, and it will be the duty of the Palestinian Authority to find them, arrest them, and give them to the Israelis. And what we have seen clearly in Jenin and Nablus, that the Palestinian Authority lost control. They lost control. Because basically, even the people from PLO supporters, meaning the Fatah group, which is the main group in there, in Nablus and Jenin, start allying themselves with the Islamists, and basically the Palestinian Authority lost control of even getting those people and arresting them and giving them to the Israelis. Because basically, the Palestinian Authority totally lost any credibility that it has, except for the people who are getting paid at the end of the month by Palestinian Authority. Now, we talked about the Oslo I Accord. After that, things took a different turn. The Israelis have shown that basically they do not want to do or follow any of those agreements, and they keep saying, we have issues with the security, and we cannot trust this, we cannot trust that. There were other agreements that took place in the so-called Paris Protocol. There was an agreement in Egypt that took place, and this and that. But despite all of this, there was nothing changing on the ground. The initial agreement says that Israel will control totally 60% of the West Bank. You see, they already control the bulk of Palestine, from the 1947-48. Now the West Bank remains, and the West Bank is what? Is less than 20% or so of this whole thing. So the Israelis came and said 60% of the West Bank will be totally under Israeli control. The rest of the West Bank will be divided into two areas. One area will be under the Palestinian Authority, where the Palestinians can have soldiers in there with arms, again, to do what we already talked about. And then there's another area where the Israelis will have the security control and the Palestinians will have some minimal role in it. Areas of A, B, and C. Of course, the areas that the Israelis have control, they do not allow the Palestinians to build in it. They do not allow the Palestinians to come even to it. So the Palestinian Authority cannot enter those areas. You have seen yesterday that the Saudi have sent this ambassador to Jordan to be the ambassador to Palestine. Although he will not reside in Palestine, he will reside in Jordan. But he will be the ambassador to Jordan and Palestine. So he met with the Palestinian leadership, and then he said there was this thing that he wanna visit Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and pray in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And what happened? They told him, don't go. You know why he changed the plans? Because Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, there is no authority in there. Jordanian government has authority on the awqaf. So they pay the salaries of the awqaf. They appoint the khatib to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. This is the agreement with the Israelis that the Jordanian government from 1967 until today, they have authority over the awqaf. So they spend the money to give the salaries and to control who give the khutbah al-Jum'ah. But within Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and its surroundings, if somebody will come there, the people there totally are free to do whatever they want. So basically when the Egyptian foreign minister said that he want to go and pray Ahmed Maher, Masjid Al-Aqsa, he was followed with the shoes. People kept throwing shoes at him until he said, he's losing his breath and he's gonna die, and he was carried out. So the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa area, the Palestinian Authority have absolutely, positively no authority in there. Not just that. The area between Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and about 4 miles to the main place where Ramallah and Al-Bira have those embassies, and Abbas is stationed and Arafat is buried unfortunately in our hometown. 3 miles from where Arafat is buried, the Palestinian Authority cannot enter. And if they want to enter for some reason, they have to call the Israelis, and the Israelis have to give them a permission. So basically, if you go to Palestine, there is a strip of street. In America here, they said the worst highway to drive in is the 35 miles or so from Washington, D.C. on 95 South. This is the worst segment to drive in highway in America. Drive on 95 from Washington, D.C. to 35 miles down, because it's always backed. Now, this is nothing compared with going from Ramallah Al-Bira, where I live, to Al-Quds. Because basically, imagine, there are almost 2, or I should say 3 miles, 3 miles, that absolutely, positively, no order. There is no policeman. There is no one to enforce traffic. There is no one to do anything to enforce any rules. People live by you need to respect your elders, you need to respect your neighbor, you need to respect this, you need to respect that. It's just this moral authority. And if you drive there, it's a nightmare. Those 3 miles will take you sometimes an hour or 2, because basically there's no order. The Israelis don't care, and the Palestinian Authority cannot come. So, طاسة وضايعة, as they said in this regard, that you have, a bucket that's being lost and see how to get it. This is Oslo. This is Oslo. Because basically, it says that the Palestinian Authority and its people cannot go there. And the Israelis need to give them permission. Most of the time, they will say no. I never seen, although I traveled this road many times since 1993, when the Oslo Accord was signed, I never seen a Palestinian guy working for the Palestinian Authority in this strip of land with 3 miles, with tens of thousands of cars traveling every day, because that's the only road that you can get from the north to Jerusalem. Except if you want to go, if you have an Israeli citizenship, you can go through the 1948 land. But the bulk of Palestinians do not have. So their way is to go through this road. If you're going from Palestine from the north to the south, meaning from Nablus, Jenin, Tul Karam, to Bethlehem and Hebron, you need to go through that road to get to this special dangerous road that is called Tariq Wad al-Nar. Tariq Wad al-Nar. The road of the Valley of Fire. Very dangerous strip of land. Again, bulk of these areas, Palestinian Authority cannot go in. If there is a car accident, you deal with each other and find a solution. You cannot say, oh, let me call the police. Because the Israeli police does not care, will not come, and the Palestinians do not have the guts to come because they know this is a violation of the Oslo Agreement in this regard. So, according to those agreements, as we said, Oslo 1 and Oslo 2, 1995, it basically supposedly divided the land in Palestine, in the West Bank, and as we said, gave 60% totally to the Israelis, and the rest, which is 40%, divided into A and B, where basically the small chunk is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. With the Israelis, they can enter at any time. Now, so those agreements were supposed to end or come to a point where the Israelis will dissolve the military civil authority. They call it civil authority. What's civil authority? Palestine was ruled by the Israeli military from 1967 until Oslo. Part of the agreement was the Israelis will dissolve the authority, this civil authority, which is basically military rule, and another stage will come. However, the Israelis never dissolve the civil authority, which is the army in charge of the West Bank. And at one point in Gaza, before, of course, the election of 2005, that the PLO lost the election and Hamas won, and eventually a war broke in, and Hamas took over Gaza and kicked the PLO and its people who were, stooges in there when they knew that the Americans are preparing for them to take over Gaza. So in this sense, there were multi-meetings after that. For example, there was a protocol concerning the redeployment in Hebron. This is January 1997. There was the Y River Memorandum, where Clinton gathered the Palestinians and the Israelis, October 1998. There was the Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum, in September 1999. There was the agreement of the movement and access in November 2006. So you will see, all those agreements where the US tried to get this somewhere, and it's not going anywhere. When the Palestinians realized, that is the leadership of the Palestinian Authority headed by Arafat, they realized that the Israelis have been playing games all along. Orders were given from Arafat to his people, and in coordination with Hamas, to start a second intifada. So there was a second intifada that basically took the time from the year 2000, and during which the Israelis decided to get rid of Arafat. So although Arafat had gave them all what they need, that you have the right to the bulk of Palestine, and we're going to accept this small chunk. There was no talk, serious talk of a Palestinian state and all of this. They decided to get rid of Arafat because they recognize that Arafat has played a role in getting his people and coordinating with the Hamas against the Israelis. Now, how Arafat was killed is a mystery, although the fingers point to Muhammad Dahlan and Mahmoud Abbas, that some kind of either, the Russian use radiation to get rid of people, so you just give a small dose that eventually will kill you. There are some people said poison. This issue was never resolved of how he was killed. He was flown, if you have seen his picture, when he was flown to Paris and he died in Paris, basically they could not rescue him. After that, the Americans and the Israelis make it clear that they will not deal with any Palestinian except one person, Mahmoud Abbas. Now, when Arafat recognized and realized that this thing is not going anywhere, and the Israelis are playing games, they are not giving anything of substance, who was his prime minister? Mahmoud Abbas. How did Mahmoud Abbas become prime minister? The Israelis and the Americans told Arafat, unless you put Mahmoud Abbas as prime minister, you are not going to get any penny. So Arafat got to the point of saying, okay, Mahmoud Abbas will be prime minister. Now Mahmoud Abbas, as we said, is much closer to the Zionists than being closer to the Palestinians. Arafat used to call Mahmoud Abbas what? Anybody knows? The Karzai of Palestine. Hassan, you should know this information. So Arafat used to say about Abbas, he is the Karzai. Now, who's Karzai? The American brought somebody to Afghanistan to become a president. His name is Hamid Karzai. So Hamid Karzai became, the symbol of being a tool, an agent in the hands of the Americans. So Arafat is the one who brought Mahmoud Abbas from the 60s.
What will you call him? Karzai. He is Karzai before it.
Right. Arafat was Karzai too, because he sacrificed this Palestinian cause for nothing, and he did not get anything, and he died without getting anything. But Arafat is the one who have adopted Mahmoud Abbas from the 1960s to be his vice. So basically the PLO, who's the head of the PLO? Yes, Arafat. Who's his vice? Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas did not change from the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. Mahmoud Abbas is Mahmoud Abbas. But the Americans told Arafat he will be the prime minister. And he will be the one who will be leading. He will be the one who's spending the money. Because they did not want to trust, because they know that Arafat, this guy cannot be trusted, although he gave them all what they need. So when Arafat appointed Abbas as a prime minister, and Abbas, of course, was coordinating day and night with the Israelis, Arafat came to the conclusion that Abbas has to go. But he cannot fire him. Because if he fire him, he will not get a penny from the donation that comes from Europe and the US and the Israelis, which is called the tax money. So what Arafat have done is he started calling Abbas the Karzai of Palestine. At that point, Abbas got the news, so he wrote a letter of resignation. Very interesting if you see it. He used a verse. He said, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ وَالسَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. That was the letter of resignation that Abbas wrote to Arafat and saying, you know, your trust, you do not have a trust in me, I'm submitting my resignation. As a result, Abu al-Ala became the prime minister of Palestine. At that point, the Israelis did not want him. The Americans did not want him. As I said, they decided to get rid of Arafat. And they got rid of him. Abbas became the Palestinian Authority. And now you know the rest of the story. That's the background where those people came from. And this is the Oslo Agreement, where now the Middle East, the Moroccan government made a deal with the Israelis. The Sudanese government made a deal with the Israelis. Jordanian government in the old days made a deal with the Israelis. Now the Saudi government is making a deal with the Israelis. And all of this is because of what? And of course the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, they are the head of the devil in this regard before the Muhammad ibn Salman. And the Middle East is no longer the Middle East that we knew, that we described in the beginning, where if you have a stamp from Tel Aviv, you cannot go to Hajj. It's to that effect. You still, as I said, see the remnant of this Middle East, where if a Syrian citizen or a Lebanese citizen made a trip to Palestine, he will be put, or she will be put in jail. I gave the example of the 85-year-old woman. Imagine what they will do with the young man. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the khair and the good to the Muslim Ummah and rescue Palestine from the hands of the likes of Abbas and from the Zionists. Allahumma ameen. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. From now on, the classes Monday, the Quran class, the Tuesday, the Shade of Quran and Riyadh Salihin, and Thursday, Islam 201 will be after Salat al-Isha, because the time of Salat al-Isha in October 1st will be 8:15, time for Adhan, inshallah. Allah yabarak.